The Development of the Marxist Doctrine of the Two Phases of Communism by Lenin and Stalin. Written by A. Stepanian. Transitional Social Forms in Historical Development. Transitional social forms are natural and inherent in historical development. These forms arise during transitions between economic formations or within mature societies. Lenin emphasized that social phenomena in development always contain remnants of the past, foundations of the present, beginnings of the future. Dialectical process of development. Transitional social forms reflect the dialectical process, showing the interaction and evolution of historical phases. Stalin's contribution to the theory. On Dialectical and Historical Materialism, Stalin provides a classical definition of basic and transitional forms of production relations. Stalin's formula outlines that people establish specific production relations when producing material goods. These relations can be cooperation and mutual assistance among individuals free from exploitation, domination and subordination. Transitional relations between these two opposing forms. Scope of transitional relations in Stalin's theory. Stalin's formula specifically addresses transitions between the two basic, opposing forms of production relations: domination and subordination, cooperation and mutual assistance. Types of production relations in cooperative systems. Two historical types of cooperative and mutual assistance relations free from exploitation. Primitive communal system. No private ownership of production means. No exploitation of people. Based on collective labor and common ownership. Socialist system. No exploiters or exploited. Represents the highest stage of historical development. Qualitative differences between systems. Socialist society stands qualitatively superior to the primitive communal system. Although both lack exploitation, socialism reflects an advanced stage in historical development with evolved production relations. Primitive collective production. Marx's perspective. Primitive collective production arose due to the weakness of isolated individuals, not the socialization of production means. It was the first form of joint human activity, rooted in blood connections within tribes. Marx referred to this as the primitive type of collective production. Socialist production relations. Socialist relations are based on the socialization of advanced means of production. They reflect the conscious activity of individuals who understand the laws of social development. Stalin's definition. Described as relations of comradely cooperation and socialist mutual assistance of workers free from exploitation. Domination and subordination. Second form includes three historical types: slave relations, feudal relations, capitalist relations. Common features: private ownership of the means of production, exploitation of labor, existence of exploiter and exploited classes, fierce class struggle. Engels' perspective. Despite differences in exploitation methods, all are forms of slavery, characterized by domination and subordination, enslavement of the masses by the exploiter class. Transitional form of production relations. Transitional production relations are intermediate between the two main forms, from domination and subordination to cooperation and mutual assistance. Definition of transition in Marxist-Leninist science. Lenin's explanation. Transitional phenomena contain elements of both systems they bridge. For example, the transitional period between capitalism and communism combines features of both systems. Quote, "In this system, there are elements, particles, pieces of both capitalism and socialism." Key understanding of transitional periods. They inherently blend the characteristics and properties of both preceding and succeeding systems. Definition of transitional social phenomenon. Lenin emphasizes that a transitional social phenomenon combines features, elements, and properties of the phenomena it bridges. Example: the transitional period between capitalism and socialism. Production relations combine aspects of cooperation and mutual assistance of people, domination and subordination. Transitional production relations in history. Independent small producers includes peasants, artisans, and craftsmen. Marx identified the petty bourgeoisie as an intermediate class. Their production relations are inherently transitional. Characteristics of small-scale production. Features of cooperative production, based on personal labor. Absence of exploitation of others' labor. Lenin's definition. Small-scale production does not involve hired labor. Differences from primitive communal and socialist production. Unlike cooperative systems, small-scale production is rooted in private property. Labor is isolated rather than collective or cooperative. Isolation in small-scale production. Marx noted that small peasants live under identical conditions, but remain isolated from one another. The mode of production separates them, lacking mutual relations inherent in communal or socialist systems. Features of domination and subordination in small-scale production. Presence of private property in the means of production. Key difference. Private property of small producers is based on personal labor. In contrast, private property in slave, feudal, and capitalist systems relies on exploitation of others' labor. Dual, contradictory nature of the petty bourgeoisie. Marxism-Leninism identifies small-scale production as inherently dual and contradictory, combines aspects of cooperation and mutual assistance with elements of domination and subordination, represents a transitional social phenomenon blending features of opposing systems. Key Marxist perspective. The petty bourgeoisie is a class with transitional production relations, exemplifying the dialectical tension between historical stages of development. Small-scale production is inherently transitional. It's not fixed in its nature and can lead to different outcomes depending on the historical context. Historically, small owners have often been forced into subordinate positions. In various historical periods, they became slaves, serfs, or wage laborers under capitalism. This highlights the vulnerability of small producers within exploitative systems. Under socialism, small owners can become part of a collective economy. This offers an alternative path where small producers can thrive through cooperation and mutual aid, rather than being forced into exploitative relationships. Peasant farming is distinct from capitalist farming. It represents a form of small-scale commodity production that exists at a crossroads. Peasant farming can develop in two directions, towards capitalism. This occurs when market forces and private ownership dominate, leading to increased competition and the potential for some peasants to become exploited. Towards socialism. This happens under the dictatorship of the proletariat, where policies and support systems are in place to guide peasant farms towards collectivization and cooperation. Determination of the nature of production relations. Forms of ownership are the foundation of production relations. Public ownership, basis for cooperation and mutual assistance. Private property, rooted in exploitation, leading to domination and subordination. Marx on property and society. Quote, there can be no talk of any production, and therefore of any society, where no form of property exists. Every form of production relations is underpinned by a specific form of property. Material basis of transitional production relations, based on private property tied to the personal labor of the owners of production means. Two main types of private property. Type A, property based on personal labor. Type B, property based on the exploitation of others' labor. Key Marxist distinction. Marxism-Leninism emphasizes the critical distinction between these two types. Personal labor-based property represents individual effort and production. Exploitation-based property, built on the labor of others and thrives at the expense of the former. Quote, the latter, exploitation-based property, not only constitutes the direct opposite of the first, but also develops only on its grave. Historical transition from personal labor to exploitation-based property. The original accumulation of capital marks a pivotal shift. Displacement of individual private property, personal labor, by capitalist property, exploitation-based. This transformation is central to the rise of capitalist production relations. Key insight. Transitional production relations bridge these two forms of property, reflecting the duality and contradictions of evolving economic systems. Marx's definition of private property. Private property versus public property exists where means of labor and external conditions of labor belong to private individuals. The nature of private property depends on whether these individuals are workers or non-workers. Dominant form of private property in class societies. Exploitation-based private property dominates class-based socio-economic formations, forms the basis for domination and subordination, giving rise to slavery, feudalism, capitalism. Secondary form of private property, personal labor-based private property, did not become dominant or define any social formation, formed the material basis for transitional production relations, exists alongside dominant production relations, following their developmental laws. Historical role of personal labor-based property, widely distributed in various formations, including during the Soviet Union's transitional period from capitalism to socialism, never became the leading or determining factor of a social system. Role of small producers in history, significant despite their subordinate role in shaping dominant socio-economic systems. Example: Russia's social development during the predominance of small-scale production highlighted its historical importance. Distinctive features of small-scale production: fragmentation of land and means of production. Excludes: concentration of production means, cooperation and division of labor within a unified production process. Social regulation and control over nature. Free development of social productive forces, limited by narrow, traditional boundaries of production and society. Marx on small-scale production. Quote from Capital. Volume 1: Small-scale production is incompatible with advanced cooperation and the division of labor. Lacks the capacity for social regulation and development of productive forces on a broader scale. Marx on the limited nature of small-scale production. Discussed extensively in the chapter, The Genesis of Capitalist Land Rent. Key distinctive features: limited and routine nature of small-scale production methods, fragmented and inefficient compared to cooperative or larger-scale production. Comparison of production modes with primitive technology. Primitive, manual technology yields different results depending on its application. Enslaved labor under landowners. Fragmented small producers. Combined labor of free, cooperative peasants. Cooperative labor achieves results unattainable by fragmented independent producers. Contrasts in production systems. Independent small-scale production. Lacks concentration of the means of production. Does not benefit from division of labor or social regulation over nature. Cooperative or regulated production, seen in primitive communal systems. Gigantic construction projects during slavery, e.g., river regulation in Egypt, Lombardy, Holland, produces results far beyond the capability of small-scale, individual production. Stalin on small-scale versus cooperative production, and on the issues of agrarian policy in the USSR. Small peasants with primitive tools could not cultivate virgin or abandoned lands effectively. Instead, they favored soft lands, suited for small-scale individual farming. United, cooperative labor allowed for cultivation of more challenging lands using the same primitive tools. Primary collective farms. Stalin's observations on early collective farms. These farms initially relied on a simple addition of peasant tools and labor. Despite modest technology, few machines, few tractors, cooperative efforts achieved remarkable productivity. Quote, "The simple addition of peasant tools in the depths of the collective farms has produced an effect that our practitioners never dreamed of." Comparison of two modes of production. Low productivity mode. Scattered small peasant farms relying on individual labor. High productivity mode. Socialist collective farms employing cooperative labor, even with minimal technology. Key takeaway. The unification of labor and resources in collective farms demonstrates the superiority of cooperative socialist production over the inefficiency and limitations of fragmented small-scale production. Misconception about transition in the USSR. Incorrect to assume all production relations in the USSR during the transition from capitalism to socialism were transitional. This confusion arises from conflating the transitional nature of the era as a whole, the nature of specific production relations within that period, transitional character of the era. The transition period was transitional because it contained features, elements, and pieces of both socialism and capitalism, a diversity of economic forms from the past and future, with ongoing struggles between them. Economic system of the transition period. Stalin at the 14th Party Congress described the system as neither capitalist nor socialist. Defined it as a system transitional from capitalism to socialism. This system encompassed 5 economic structures, each with distinct production relations. Nature of specific production relations. Socialist production relations. In state industry, transport, and other sectors. Represented comradely cooperation and socialist mutual assistance. Were not transitional, but consistently socialist in nature. Private capitalist production relations. Based on domination and subordination. Capitalists exploited workers and appropriated surplus labor. Not transitional, but clearly capitalist. Their temporary existence during the period was due to external factors, not any internal transitional character. State capitalist production relations. These relations were also not transitional in nature. Key insight on transition. Transitional relations specifically refer to those that combine elements of both past and future systems. In contrast, relations within purely socialist or capitalist systems during the transition period were not transitional themselves, even if their existence was temporary. Role of state capitalism in the transition period. The proletarian state used state capitalism as an intermediary link between small-scale production and socialism. However, the production relations in state capitalist enterprises were not transitional in their internal character. State capitalism under the proletarian dictatorship. 2 classes exist. Exploiting class. Capitalists, e.g., concessionaires, owning the means of production. Exploited class. Workers, lacking ownership of production means. These relations retain a capitalist essence, regardless of form, e.g., concessions, leases. Theoretical importance of differentiating production relations. Not all production relations before socialism were transitional. State capitalist relations were purely capitalist. Socialist production relations in state industries were clearly socialist. If all relations were considered transitional, it would obscure the class struggle between capitalism and socialism. It would eliminate the need for Lenin's critical question, who will win? It would incorrectly imply that all relations inherently developed toward socialism. Transitional production relations in the USSR. Only the production relations of small owners, peasants, handicraftsmen, artisans were transitional. These groups occupied a middle position. Lenin, the peasantry, and petty bourgeoisie are intermediate under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Stalin, the middle peasant fluctuated between worker status, aligned with the working class, owner status, aligned with the kulak or bourgeoisie, class struggle in the transition period. 2 main opposing forms of production relations. Socialist production relations, backed by the working class. Capitalist production relations, backed by the bourgeoisie. The struggle between these classes determined the direction of transitional production relations, toward capitalism or socialism. Lenin's question whom centered on the path small-scale production, e.g. peasant farming, would take. Transformation of small owners. Socialist production relations were the leading force, guiding small owners toward socialism. Small private farms transitioned into collective farms. Handicraftsmen and artisans were integrated into the socialist economy. Theoretical justification for re-education. The contradictory nature of small owners enables transformation. Depending on historical conditions, small owners can evolve toward capitalism, domination, and subordination. Toward socialism, cooperation, and mutual assistance. Marxism-Leninism underscores the potential for the victorious proletariat to remake and re-educate small peasants in the socialist spirit. Key conclusion. The internal contradictions of small owners provided a basis for their alignment with either capitalism or socialism, shaped by the dominant forces in the transition period. Socialist production relations played the decisive role in steering these transitional relations toward the socialist path. Origin of the production of independent small owners emerged from the disintegration of the primitive communal system, coexisted with dominant production modes, slave, feudal, capitalist societies. Peak of free small owners' mode of production. Marx's observation reached full flourishing in ancient history during a period when Eastern communal property had disintegrated. Slavery had not yet taken over production significantly. This period formed the economic basis of classical society in its most prosperous era. Coexistence of free and slave labor in ancient societies. Historian V. Sergeyev notes, ancient societies featured a mix of slave and free labor, unlike North America, where slavery displaced free labor entirely. The struggle between slave and free labor defined the history of ancient societies. In ancient Rome, free small farmers coexisted with slavery, often ruined by large latifundia, leading to migration to cities and forming the lumpen proletariat. Frequently joined slave rebellions, e.g., Spartacus Rebellion, First Sicilian Slave Rebellion. Spread of small owners in feudalism and beyond became widespread during the disintegration of feudalism. Examples include England, Sweden, France, and Western Germany, where free peasant estates emerged. Post-Great October Socialist Revolution in Russia. Growth of small owners due to the destruction of capitalist and landlord land ownership. Post-World War II. Increase in small owners in Poland, Hungary, and Romania after the liquidation of landlord land ownership. Historical types of small producers. Each socio-economic formation creates a distinct historical type of small producer. Primitive communal system. Semi-communist, reliant on the community. Slave society. Sometimes owned slaves for small-scale farming. Feudal society. Craftsmen organized small-scale workshops to resist feudal oppression. Capitalist society. Commodity producers subjected to capitalist exploitation and peasant class differentiation. Small producers and exploitation. Formally independent, not slaves, serfs, or hired workers, but still subject to economic and political oppression by dominant exploiting classes. Slave societies. Ruined by large landowners and turned into slaves or lumpen proletarians. Feudal societies. Paid tribute to feudal lords and faced oppression. Capitalist societies. Exploited by kulaks and urban bourgeoisie. Influence of historical context. Small producers adapt to and are shaped by the dominant production relations and socio-economic formations of their time. The laws of the prevailing system govern their existence, imposing unique features on small producers within each formation. Key Marxist perspective. Small proprietors reflect the transitional and evolving nature of production relations. Their role, independence, and oppression vary by socio-economic system. Their transitional position often bridges past communal systems and emerging dominant modes of production. Unique characteristics of peasantry in the Soviet Union. In the USSR, the power of exploitative classes was overthrown, creating unique conditions for peasant development during the transition from capitalism to socialism. Differentiation of the peasantry in the Soviet Union differed significantly from that in capitalist countries. The middle peasant was the central figure before collectivization. Peasant households were progressively integrated into socialist production through cooperation and public economy training. By 1927, 2 million households participated in contracting. Over 1 million households engaged in cooperative processing of agricultural products. State and cooperative bodies provided over 50% of industrial goods to villages. Managed the sale of 63% of agricultural products. These characteristics were shaped by the socialist nature of leading production relations. Nature of small producers across history. The small producer is not inherently a commodity producer. In capitalist societies, small producers are predominantly commodity producers. In earlier societies, they operated within a natural economy. Small producers' production relations always constitute a transitional form, regardless of the historical era. Small proprietor as a historical category. Small proprietors are not an eternal or superhistorical category, do not exist in the primitive communal system, disappear as a mass phenomenon in an established socialist society. Their history includes a beginning, stages of development, and end. Their characteristics evolve with changing social conditions in each historical era. Misinterpretation of eternity in historical categories. Historical categories like small proprietors, commodity production, and exploitation may persist across various epochs, but are not eternal. Marx. Commodity production and circulation occur in diverse modes of production, but differ in volume and significance. Engels. The law of value prevailed for 5,000 to 6,000 years, yet it is not eternal. Categories like commodity production and the law of value have specific historical limits tied to the modes of production in which they operate. Conclusion on historical categories. While certain phenomena may span long historical periods, they are shaped by specific socio-economic conditions and eventually disappear in new formations, e.g. socialism. The small producer, like other historical categories, is transient, tied to the modes of production of particular eras, and ultimately ceases to exist in socialist society. Origins of transitional production relations. Transitional production relations evolve into domination and subordination, e.g., slavery, feudalism, capitalism. Cooperation and mutual assistance, e.g., socialism. This progression is thoroughly analyzed in the works of Marxism-Leninism. Primitive communities and public ownership. Primitive communities were characterized by public ownership of land and means of production, communal economy and labor, with products distributed based on consumption needs. Marx's observation. Primitive communities were formed based on blood relationships among members. Emergence of private property. Engels' explanation. The first private property emerged as estate land tied to personal dwellings, transitioned from nomadic tents to permanent homes. The home became a symbol of personal freedom and later private ownership. Over time, private estates became fortresses that threatened communal land ownership. Disintegration of the communal system. Accumulation of movable property accelerated the decline of communal ownership. Private use of land emerged, leading to the growth of private land ownership. Based on personal labor, it represented the first form of private ownership. This transition was a natural outcome of the communal system, driven by the laws of production. Dual existence of communal and private property. Even after the emergence of private property, remnants of the communal system persisted. A community of free and equal private owners emerged. Union among these private owners ensured their independence and survival. Heyday of free private ownership. The classical ancient world marked the peak of this community of independent private owners. This period showcased a balance between individual ownership and communal traits, although it eventually gave way to more stratified systems. Historical dynamics. Private property naturally and logically grew out of communal ownership due to changes in production requirements. These developments laid the groundwork for subsequent economic and social transformations, including the establishment of hierarchical systems of domination or cooperative forms of mutual assistance. Relationship between the individual and the community. In the communal system, each community member was a private owner of land. Membership in the community was essential for owning land, and vice versa. A person could be a private landowner because of their community membership. The community guaranteed private property, which was vital for the individual. Emergence of private property. Private property based on personal labor arose within the communal system. Early private owners were still deeply rooted in the communal system. Disintegration of communal systems. Reproduction of previous living conditions. Initially sustains the communal system, but eventually leads to its destruction. Marx's observation. Growth in productive forces and population undermines the conditions sustaining the communal system. Communal systems perish when population growth creates pressure on shared land ownership. Colonization. Expands territory but promotes individual land ownership. Leads to wars of conquest and the introduction of slavery, altering economic conditions. Dialectic of the communal system. The system's own development leads to its destruction. Reproduction of conditions also involves their transformation and destruction. Marx. The preservation of the old collective includes the destruction of the conditions on which it is based, and passes into its opposite. Historical role of small owners. The production relations of small owners emerged during the disintegration of the communal system. Represent the first historical example of transitional production relations. Initially rooted in cooperation and mutual assistance, they later transformed into domination and subordination. Transition to slavery. Process of transformation. Individual small property evolves into large private property based on exploitation. Stages of slavery. Patriarchal slavery, initially soft. Slaves were seen as members of the tribe and workers, not exploited for profit. Exploitation-based slavery developed into the first classical form of domination and subordination, marked by the systematic exploitation of others' labor for profit. Key historical insight. The transition from small private property to large private property illustrates the historical shift from cooperation to exploitation. The communal system's decline highlights the dialectical nature of social and economic evolution, where development inevitably generates conditions for its own transformation. Stages of the slave economy. The slave economy evolves from a patriarchal system focused on personal consumption to a plantation system producing for the global market. Origins of slavery in the disintegration of the communal system. Marx's explanation. War and conquest. Property in the communal system is tied to tribal membership. Conquered tribes are deprived of property, reduced to the status of objects, e.g., land, cattle. Slavery emerges as a natural result of this dispossession. Deprivation within the tribe. Private property enables expropriation of other members' property, leading to the impoverishment of small owners. Slavery as a derivative form. Marx and Engels. Slavery and serfdom are stages of development within property based on the tribal system. These are not original systems, but arise as inevitable consequences of private property rooted in the communal system. Historical examples of expropriation and its consequences. Ancient Rome. Free plebeians were expropriated. Wars and military duties led to ruin. Plebeians became debtors and were ultimately enslaved. Large landowners accumulated wealth, leading to a slave-based mode of production rather than capitalism. Medieval Europe, under Charlemagne, free peasants were ruined by wars and became serfs, not slaves. This occurred because feudal production relations were already dominant. 16th century Germany. Similar processes turned free peasants into serfs due to the prevailing feudal system. Expropriation in England and the rise of capitalism. In England, free small peasants were expropriated, transforming fragmented private property into concentrated capitalist property. England's shift to capitalist production influenced other Western European countries. Contrasting developments in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, e.g., Romania during the 19th century, serfdom relations arose due to the influence of feudal, serfdom-based Russia. Marx demonstrated how free peasants were converted into serfs under these conditions. Impact of historical circumstances on transitional production relations. Marx's insight. Similar processes, e.g. expropriation, produced different outcomes depending on the prevailing economic conditions. In Rome, slavery. In medieval Europe, serfdom. In England, capitalism. Critique of superhistorical theories. Universal theories fail to explain historical phenomena without considering the specific economic and social context of each era. Key conclusion. The development of transitional production relations is shaped by the dominant economic conditions and historical circumstances. The same process, e.g. expropriation, leads to slavery, serfdom, or capitalism based on the prevailing system of production relations. Economic and social context plays a decisive role in determining the path of development. Transformation of free small owners. The transformation of free small owners into slaves, serfs, or proletarians was marked by violent class struggle. Historical example. In England, 15th to 16th centuries, small peasants forcibly deprived of land were subjected to terrorist laws designed to force them into hired labor through whips, brands, and torture, as detailed in Chapter 24 of Marx's Capital. Dependence on historical environment. Marx's response to Zasulich. The development of capitalist relations is not a universal outcome. The historical environment and prevailing production relations determine the path of development. The Russian rural community could avoid the capitalist path if conditions allowed. Example, a proletarian revolution in the West could complement the Russian Revolution, enabling communist development from communal ownership. Lenin on bypassing capitalism. At the Second Congress of the Communist International, Lenin argued, Backward countries do not need to pass through the capitalist stage. With the support of advanced proletarian countries, they can transition directly to the Soviet system and eventually to communism. Impact of socialist production relations in the USSR. Under socialism, transitional production relations of small owners evolved into cooperation and mutual assistance, a stark contrast to previous systems where they led to domination and subordination. Stalin's perspective. The path of peasant farms under socialism in the USSR was fundamentally different. The city, led by the proletariat, guided the village towards socialist construction. Development of small farms under socialism. Unlike in capitalist or feudal systems, large-scale public economies in the USSR did not destroy or ruin small farms. Instead, uplifted small and middle-class farms by introducing higher levels of technology, culture, and organization, acting as a source of assistance and guidance for their gradual integration into large-scale economies. Decision of the 16th Conference of the All-Union Communist Party. Public economies linked with individual farms, demonstrating the advantages of collective production while organizing support for their unification. World historical significance. The Soviet system demonstrated a unique historical path for transitional production relations. Small-scale production developed along socialist lines, confirming its transitional nature. This development contrasted sharply with previous eras, where small producers were absorbed into systems of exploitation.